Welcome back, everyone, to the Tier 2 talk. Today, I'm joined by the best duo in the world. Let's not make any comparisons here. Okay, right. To summarise your story, Jay, pizza cook, mate. You're gonna make yourself a joint, basically. After you retire from casting, you're making yourself a pizza joint.
Yes, as I was saying before I was so rudely muted by the producer.
Thank
I
you.
I perfected my from scratch pizza recipe now. So my retirement plan is to go ahead and make pizza when I retire from esports. Probably in the next 5 years, if I haven't found myself under a truck by that point. We'll find out how that goes. Yes, ReTr00. Tier 1 pizza cook right here.
Nice. Dweg, 4 wins at LAN, mate. How does it feel? Still feeling on the highs, or?
Yeah, definitely. Get the tingling every day.
Yeah.
As a whole, if you know you ain't making playoffs, do not prep for every map of the pool, because we prep for best of ones. 4 map pools, that's the way to go, mate. Just ban all the other 3. That's the way forward. That's how you get 4 wins.
Yeah, of course. I'm into the bench. Now a coach. Thank you. Not much to say.
Not much to say.
Legit? No, I'm not coaching them. You know, we're out there in the open for now. Right. Okay, let's talk Counter-Strike, gents. First and foremost, as you can see at the bottom, 4 topics for today. The Pinnacle and Thunderpick, both sort of playoffs now becoming. I think Thunderpick were a little deeper into the event than Pinnacle. We've got all the roster shuffles going on right now. I know, Dweg, you're a big fan of them, always have been. And then obviously ESL Challenger League and the ESEA Playoffs. I guess we're going to come down to an advanced level as well, which is why we include the ESEA branding. And then, of course, we've got to top off the day by talking about UKCS. At one point or another, we've got to flail the flag a little bit. So, yeah, we'll talk about that. Let's start with the Pinnacle and Thunderpick playoffs. Gents, I want to start with Pinnacle, and we'll move to Thunderpick. I think we can very much talk about this openly. It's looking very good now, guys. We've just had in the 4 teams invited to the playoffs, so I'll throw this one up on screen for everyone at home as well. As you can see, obviously the 8 teams: Blue Jays, Gamer Legion, For Glory, Tricked, Copenhagen Flames, Endpoint, Mouse NXT, Skade. We've just had Ecstatic, Vitality, OG, and Ents invited. What are our thoughts and opinions?
Pretty stacked invite list.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, I think we'll try and go in the player order, right, of the cameras, because I think last time we just buckled that completely. So, the first thing I'll say before I, get involved here, is this is actually a playoff invite with Tier 1 teams. And I think that's maybe something the last couple of events, maybe not just so much Pinnacles, but as a whole in the Tier 2 landscape, where the majority of the last few months, we've actually seen the high-end Tier 2 teams being invited. So it's actually very nice to see some of the top dogs coming back in, because it kind of gives more of a challenge for some of the main Swiss teams.
Yeah, and before they all get fucking upset as they usually do. In the
that's true.
I'll admit, this time I'm kind of shocked the Vitality decided to accept an invitation to this, because that to me, like, we obviously have those like levels of where you weigh the teams when it comes to this invite stage. You've got those like really high-end squads that are competing in the top ends of the space. They're doing your RVs and your G2s and blah, 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 blah. Then you have those borderline squads who are sort of like, they're competing in Tier 1, but they're not all that good at Tier 1, like your OGs, like your bigs and blah, 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 blah. Vitality are usually put them up higher than that position, like, in the Tier 1 teams that are competing in the top. So, like, it's kind of shocking to me that name would be here. I think that the results that they've had as of late is probably a bit more telling to why they would accept a result or accept an invite like this.
I would say the reason is the top-heavy prize pool. Because you think about how the prize funds are distributed for Pinnacle Cup 3, 80 grand for first place and 20 grand for second. So you're one of these invited teams, you win quarterfinal, semi-final, grand final, 3 best of 3s, 80 grand. So that probably attracts a little bit more of the higher caliber squads, just with the fact of, okay, normally it's like 40 grand, 50 grand maybe for first, but 80,000, there's not many events out there right now in the Tier 2 landscape that have got that for first place.
Yeah, agreed. I think actually it's going to be super interesting to watch that little leak. I'm on the grand finals of that, so I couldn't be happier to be watching that. And I think actually, as you said, Dweg, with the top-heavy format, this actually benefits a lot of the teams. And as much as obviously we can sit here and say probably Vitality don't deserve to be mentioned in sort of a Tier 2 talk or the circuit, right? I think it's very comfortable saying their results haven't been the level maybe that we anticipated at this point in time. So actually seeing them in the tier 2 space, I mean, they should win all 3 BO3s and win this entire event, right? I think OG, maybe ENTS as well. Like that's not a bad lower half of the bracket, but overall, I think if Vitality don't win this, then we can point and laugh. And I think for them, actually, there's a lot of mental on the line as well, right, with the name and the branding.
See, the key word in that whole phrase, on that whole like monologue you've just given there is should win.
Yes.
Because all the invitees, by all accounts, should take the wins. But how many times have we actually seen one of these tournaments, whether that be Pinnacle Cup or Winter Series or Snow Sweet Snow or whatever the hell it is? Well, how many times have we actually seen one of these invitees actually make the run to the grand finals? There's actually very few times if you just tally it all up.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think even if I want to touch on the main Swiss, a little bit of the teams that qualified through into that round of 12, For Glory really impressed me this event. They came through the play-in stage, and this is Kindo, Collins, I think they picked up AVN and Impulse, some of the more veteran guys. Dimke's in there as well. We saw him on Onyx. They beat Fambit, Big Academy, and then went 3-0 in the main Swiss when... Really, if we compare the level of competition here in that stage of the tournament, they're not a favorite to even make it in the top 8, let alone go 3-0. So that's actually very well done from For Glory. And even Blue Jays as well. That North Macedonian team is doing very well the last few months when we think back to some of the placements where they've been in the past. I think the only other surprises that I saw in the main Swiss as a whole was Smuya was up in the very high echelons of some of the numbers being posted, but ITB didn't quite make it through. Roy and Yabi played very well as a whole on that Copenhagen Flame side. And then Kaka Nico, or Kaka Nasto, the guy that plays on Blue Jays, and Collins from For Glory were a couple of individuals that I watched and were very solid in the main Swiss.
Yeah. Any comments, Jay?
Well, nothing particular on the players themselves. I mean, I take a look, again, going back to that whole upset potential, the only real team I can see making an upset run from those round of 12 squads are probably Skade and Copenhagen Flames by all accounts. Endpoint, I'm not particularly rating of it as at the moment because they're taking a dip from where they used to be. I think they probably go out to the Flames in that one. And the only other concern on that front of things would be Skade taking on Vitality, because that would probably be the run killer for anyone in that particular branch. And Ecstatic even are going to be fearful of that Vitality side. Because I think that this is a team that probably should be able to hold their own. Vitality, obviously, they've had a disappointing start to the year thus far. But I think that with a bit of time, they're going to become like a solid tier 1 opposition. So in the tier 2 space, this is the perfect chance to prove that, I feel like. And I think that when you compare to what they've been doing recently, like Vitality should be able to take this trophy overall. Everyone else is going to be super duper concerned as to where they can stand, especially the tier 2 squads from round of 12.
Yes, let's jump ship now to the other, what I would say tier 2 event is, and I think as we touched on earlier, we wanted to focus on the playoffs a little bit. Just going to bring up the graphic for everyone at home to see how the Thunderpick playoffs went off there. Basically, what it feels like this event is sort of as anticipated in the round of 16 for the Pinnacle Cup 3, right, where these teams actually themselves of a similar level. We're seeing Copenhagen Flames in the mix again. Nice to see K23 making a very deep run in this event. Obviously, we've got Ecstatic, one of the invited teams in the Pinnacle Cup 3, now, of course, making the grand finals of this Thunderpick Bitcoin series. Sinners getting a decent run as well. Sprout in the mix has always been a talking point for us. Gents, any particular place you want to start off with?
The way that I look at this bracket straight away is Sinners as a whole, I think have actually had quite a tough time this year when we think back to how much of a rise they were last. This actually shows a decent placement of being able to get to the quarterfinals, but as a whole, ever since really Oscar's left the team, it has felt like even with Forzy's addition, they haven't quite been able to get to that same level marker. We can see straight away all invited teams all making it through the round of 8. Disappointing for some of them. I mean, Dreamer on Skade, Neofrag on Sinners, and Zorti on Forza were just unreal in some of the earlier stages of the playoffs, but having a difficult time. Seeing a lot of 2-0s as well in that quarterfinals disappointed me. because Jay and I, we saw Heat and Skade take each other on in the ESEA Grand Final. For them to not even take a map against K23, Skade and Ecstatic, I mean, that went 3 maps, but for Sinners and Tropic and Copenhagen Flames Dig to not go to 3 maps was slightly disappointing for the main Swiss teams.
I kind of want to give a bit of forgiveness to Heat, though, on that K23 result, because K23 have been pretty hot lately. It's kind of unique to see how these guys, I mean, Fanbit result aside, obviously, but, you know, those guys have always been like one of those tier 2 teams that have stuck around and been competitive. And in terms of what they've been doing so far this year, for the most part, it has been pretty competitive. And this could be like a nice little first title as well. Towards the end of the last year and everything, they obviously made deep runs in the Fun Spark events. So they've always, like, in the last, like, 6 months or so, they've held their own and they've been able to find a resurgence, I think, in this particular side. I think I probably would have rated Heat as favourites in that matchup regardless, but you can obviously see from that bracket as well, K23 are in the grand final. So right now, in terms of what we could be seeing from them, they could still be a championship squad. And I also compare that matchup itself, for me, when it comes down to just pure head-to-heads, like between that match and the Ecstatic Skade game, it feels like those two would be the closest sort of affair from the Heat, from that whole like quarterfinal bracket. So for Heat, I can forgive them a little bit because it is a very capable tier 2 squad they're taking on, and I think that match could probably swing either way.
Yeah. I think the only thing that we could say about that is grand finals on the 29th, so in a few days. First place takes 40 grand, second place takes 20 grand. So if anyone wants to keep an eye on K23 versus Ecstatic, it's next week. So yeah, very soon.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's safe to say as well, if we want to reference the Pinnacle event, right, that's happening over the next 3 days. So tomorrow, next day, day after, that's the whole event sorted there. So actually, we're quite set when it comes to Tier 2 Counter-Strike for the next week or so. Two fairly big events coming to a close. Obviously, I think more so maybe in the Tier 1 space, the Pinnacle event. But no, absolutely. Anything you want to say before we move forward to the roster shuffle side of things?
I don't think there's anything else to touch on this event, other than all the invitees getting through. Whether that's the same with Pinnacle, we'll have to wait.
Yes, okay, absolutely. We are going to move forward now, and we're going to talk about roster shuffles. I have selected a couple that I wanted to talk about with you guys, and then I think it's safe to say we can sort of disperse and talk about whatever. First things first, I think being the Tier 2 talk, we've got to talk about Fnatic a little bit with the changes that they've had. Yep. Obviously, maybe for those at home that have lived under a rock or whatever. Fnatic have made pretty big changes to their starting lineup in terms of bringing some people in, and of course then themselves have also decided to bring up some talent from the academy team, right? So I think we can start off with that first, gents. Quick thoughts on the changes made, obviously bringing in Poison and then bringing up Pepzor. That's always a fun one to see. What are our thoughts?
Well, the one that I look at immediately with Pepzor is hopefully he gets a decent opportunity, because obviously he's only been brought in as a stand-in. So it could be the situation where you get promoted to the main team, you might play for a couple of weeks or a month or so and then go back down. But for an academy level player, even a month is just so much more experience than you'll ever gain in the lower team. So getting that promotion, very good opportunity for him to sort of prove himself. We saw for Regali as well, he's actually being kind of demoted back down to the academy team. So as a whole, I think it's a very good way to use him as a stand-in. You don't have to have a buyout, or you don't have to try and get another player from a different team. Use an academy player as a stand-in, and if it works out well, then so be it for Fnatic.
I mean, personally, I'm stunned that they managed to go as deep as they did in the Pro League. Like, I honestly had them going out of that whole group. Like, and to be fair, it was only one result that made the difference between that match, but between them and the Mouse Sports side. So in terms of like what Fnatic have done, credit to them to be able to pull off what they have done with the very last second roster changes and trials and stand-ins and the whole scenario being as it was. I have to say though, I did not enjoy the Counter-Strike that they were putting out during the Pro League, and I think long term this team probably doesn't work. I feel like maybe Poison might find a place in the roster. I don't feel like Pepzor is going to keep his spot. not, I think he's going to go back to the academy team because I think something tells me that Fnatic are looking for other free agents to pick up in that sense in this whole academy, in this whole like rebuilding phase. And I have to say, by the way, that also compared to the last Fnatic roster, I think this team is nothing like what they used to have before. Obviously, losing Brolin is kind of their hand being forced. I don't think Smooya needed to be kicked. I think that was the worst move that the organization could have made because prior to this whole, prior to the shitstorms kicking off, they were a decent dark horse, and considering the elements they have on that roster, a dark horse probably is the best place for Fnatic right now.
See, I disagree from that standpoint because I think, right, from an outsider's point of view, we can have a look at the numbers. We can have a look at the performance in the server. But if there's obviously something wrong with the mix of players, then you don't keep it because someone's doing well. You have to make a change, and you have to make a difference to make the lineup feel as comfortable as possible. And if it came down to the Fnatic guys not mixing in with Smooya, whatever it may be, then changes have got to be made. I think outlying their performance in Pro League, they actually probably surpassed expectations. It's just one event, though, so give him another couple of events. Maybe we can get an eye tester. For Poison's sake, I think it's great that he's been able to sort of get back over. We obviously saw what he's been able to do in the Bulgarian scene in some of the lower divisions in the years previous and how much of a gun he could be. I think he's performed very well recently, so give him another couple of events, and maybe in a few episodes' time we can recap and have a look at where Fnatic are there.
See, like, right now, I'm sort of like looking into the future and trying to weigh up the possibilities more than anything else with this particular team. And I'm not quite as big a fan as Poison for me personally, especially because I consider what he was doing on Complexity prior to that whole roster's dissolution, and he wasn't great at all. For an AWP player as well, like, I just feel like it was a desperation move because they had to get an AWPer because they ditched their ditched their previous one on the trial basis. So having him in the roster, yeah, it fills a spot, but I don't have the most confidence state in the world. And you mentioned that Bulgarian stuff that he used to do in previous teams. That was years ago. Like, Windigo was 2019 at this point. So, like, we're talking like such a big period of time since Poison's last really solid position in terms of Counter-Strike, and Complexity was a complete dud, as we all know. So it's just like, it's just the parts don't make sense compared to what they had previously. And internals and everything, yeah, sure, that's fine. I think the organization of the Ultimate are the Ultimate guys that fucked it up because they obviously have contributed to this whole roster disbanding, and for the sake of what? Like, they've already ditched one of the Swedes anyway. Crims, I don't know about him. Like, it to me, it just doesn't feel like it was a move that made sense. And the moves coming in, yes, they've got potential. I just don't see it working long term.
Guess the next 2 points fit in quite nicely for those maybe at home as well that didn't see Coalesce and ITB yet to be announced, but I think everyone's under the impression that Thomas is going to ITB now to be the new fifth.
Can I just insert a point here? Because the last Thursday that we were on Premiership, not this past on Thursday, but the Thursday before, I think it was the Thursday or the Monday, we interviewed Adam from ITB on the Premiership broadcast, and we asked him, I was like, yeah, any chance you want to leak us a little bit of info as to who your pickup is? And he literally just turned around and said, yeah, just check our Faceit pugs and see who we've been playing with. And so we all know it's Thomas. Yeah. Like, it's not even a point in trying to deny it at this point. It's the worst kept secret in all of UKCS. Yeah, he's going to the ITB roster. And as well as that, he's sort of on trial playing international tournaments. So at this point, he's on the roster as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and obviously with Coalesce losing Thomas, we always talk about Coalesce. Well, I don't think we were massive fans of this roster in the first place. I think we kind of knew from the get-go it was going to be a little bit difficult to see if they could actually make it and prosper as a team. We were excited to see what they could do, but I don't think we're going to be very entertained by these guys for an incredible amount of time, just because they've already lost a player a month in, and the mutual decision was that Thomas wasn't the right fit. And it's kind of like, well, now you're down to 4 people. They've just booked time in London. You know, they just had all of the player photos taken. You've lost a player, basically, is what's just happened. And so they're down to 4. We don't even know who the new 5th is. And ITB have just swept in, made this a full 5 UK roster, and they're going to run with it, right? It's sad to see Isk and Tadpole go, I must admit. Good friends with both players outside of the game as well. It's nice talking to them both. I think ISK now is trying to focus on getting FPLC from what it looks like on Twitter and sort of the roar about that. And for Tadpole, I mean, I don't even know where Kirk's going at this point. I mean, there's the obvious thing that he could stick with the UK scene. Maybe he goes European and maybe takes the swaggy approach, right, and not exactly making a team in Royals or you know, trying to guide a team to success, but get into the European space rather than the UK. There's a lot of opportunities, and I feel like there's a lot of lost talent here, right, in ISK and Tadpole. Thomas as well moving across, that's a big pickup. Smooya as well. For the UK scene in general, this is seen as a big plus, but I'm more interested in knowing where the two lads that got dropped from ITB go.
I think there's a lot to dive into here. Obviously, for Thomas, it sucks for Coalesce's point of view that you kind of pick a 5-man team and then one of your players leaves after playing 4 maps on HLTV. I mean, it's not a very long period of time at all. On paper, this is a very good ITB-looking squad. It's all-rounded. It looks like it's got a fantastic amount of potential around it. I think for Tadpole, like you mentioned, he puts himself in a very awkward position because there aren't really any spots on Fambit. There aren't any spots on Eco. So where do you kind of go? Do you go to like the new Dretman side? Do you go to TLR and kind of drop even further? Or do you just go elsewhere? He might have to be in a spot where you go international for 6 months. You hope, or at least from Tadpole's perspective, that Fambit make a roster change, that Eco make a roster change, and then you come back and wait for that position to be open. But as of right now, he finds himself in a very difficult one. I think ISK has already proved to himself on the international landscape to be a very capable AWPer, and a lot of tier 2 teams, maybe down on the lower side or in the middle side, would be very fortunate to be able to pick someone up like him. But yeah, I think there are some changes to be made. And for ITB, this hopefully puts them in a position now with the names that they've got and the results that are being posted that they can continue getting invites and keep rising up the rankings and put some better performances on.
I think the tragic thing for ISK and his whole move away from the ITB roster is the fact that he is obviously dual nationality, or like he's living in the UK, he's a Ukrainian player as well, so he could have had those links into the CIS scene had the situation globally not been the way that they are. So that was one other option for ISK in his own right. I'm not certain about playing in the international space because he has mostly stuck to the UK scene for the most part. And as a result, like that sort of like international angle for me doesn't quite make as much sense. And you're sort of looking at the UK space post-Premiership roster shuffles and what have you, and figuring out where he fits into the fold on that front. I think there's a lot of what-ifs and a lot of maybes involved in his sort of position. Tadpole, I can't really disagree with too much on that front. Again, he's also mostly stuck to the UK scene, so I wouldn't be too shocked if he tries to go into the UK space once again. He's always been part of the UK scene, like Nerd Rage, Wind and Rain, Chets, blah, 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 blah. I don't think there's ever been like a true international roster for him. And honestly, all respect to the guy, I don't know if he's really ready to be an international player just yet. He doesn't quite have that spark that I think an international player from the UK space requires. Like when I think about Thomas and what his talents, his skill set and his talents have, and I think about Smooya and what his talent and skill set has, I just don't think that Tadpole has that X factor, if you will.
Yeah, I mean the guy's young though, isn't he? He's 19. I think it's his birthday today, right? So if I'm not mistaken.
Happy birthday! Sorry, I just chat on you.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, that's a disrespect. Yeah, he's turned 19 today, so happy birthday, Kirk. Yeah, that's a nice Christmas birthday present. Sorry, that you can receive in the timeline later. But no, you're right. I think that for him, it's going to be a bit difficult. Maybe, obviously, maybe not EC Brugge themselves, but I'm thinking someone in and around that level, right?
Yeah.
Where like we see him.
You might be right.
Like maybe even if you want to call it tier 3, right? As much as that is a bit harsh, but he sits in, even if it is more of a supportive player than it is a star man, where we get to see him build up that European experience. I think you're right, Jay. He isn't ready for the gun in the tier 2 space just yet. Probably ITB is going to be his best chance for a little while, but there's no doubt that he can build up his portfolio if he drops down a tier, because the guy has got talent as a rifler, and I am excited to see the future for him. As I said, very young, just hoping that he can find the right team, right, and hope he can find the right space.
Yeah, I think that assessment's probably accurate. Like, if he does go international, it probably would be to insert into one of those teams that aren't always playing in the tier 2 cups. Obviously, like, I'm just trying to think of names off the top of my head. I can't really think of any. But, you know, like you mentioned the EC Brugge side, that would be quite nice as well. Fambit, obviously, they've been competing and doing some decent work in the advanced level, so that that kind of particular position would probably be his best sort of his best sort of way in. Other than that, again, I can't really see it working as well as it had done for other players in the UK scene, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Do you want to talk on a more European level then for the roster shuffles?
I've got a few more transfers.
Yes.
The one that I think of straight away, if we want to start looking European, is the new Little Mix looking lineup with the ex-Aura players. Franson just joined up with them only very recently. Even though they're more towards the lower end, I think, of the competitive teams in the Tier 2 atmosphere, it is fantastic to see that an Augurless team like Aura have pretty much all been able to go somewhere and have been able to find a home and have been able to get under some contracts. So that's one. I mean, if we want to talk about the academy teams even further, we could talk about the Mouse Sports move and maybe the big move as well.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite excited for that Mouse Sports move because, well, I'm excited, but I'm also worried about that whole Mouse Sports move because, I mean, look, they had an incredible run with JDC and him standing in, and I think that he's probably one of the guys you look at and think to yourselves that he's probably a future talent, most certainly. My problem is for the permanency of this particular move and the situation in regards to losing NBK is the fact that I just think that they need that experience to try and coach guys like JDC, like Torzy, and bring them up in a much more experienced angle. I think that whilst it's a great firepower move for Mouse Sports, I think that in the long term, again, my thinking is always short term and long term. In the short term, it might do something decent. In the long term, I think that people are going to figure him out and exploit those smaller mistakes on their own part for the Mouse Sports camp. So I'm excited to see if JDC can do well and like springboard that into a future. But I think that for Mouse Sports, again, it's just sort of like one of those things that if you think about the bigger picture, it just doesn't make sense.
Well, the angle I look at it is look at the head coach of Cyclone. He used to be the head coach of the academy team, and now you've got 2 academy players in the main team. So in that sort of atmosphere, are you lacking experience if you know that your head coach has not only coached these guys previously, but now has the capability to coach at an even higher level and to try and put them in those shoes to be able to really do well? So, yeah, it's another one of those where time will tell with this sort of lineup. I think for JDC, he was without a doubt one of the strongest riflers, probably up there with Zershan on the team itself. So one of them had to get a call up at some point or another, whether it be now or down the line. It's happened now. So they'll see how the academy team does as well. I know that you just pricked up their retro of the Gym Fat, the young Swede, the young Finn, I should say, sorry, over from Conquer, that is doing some work. And I think Jay and I have had some level of experience watching this guy in, I think, 2 best of 3s over the last year or so. But his stats tell a monster picture. So hopefully he could do quite well standing in for him.
It'd be nice to see, wouldn't
it? I mean, I can't personally make an assessment individually for Jim Fat because, as you mentioned, we've only seen him a couple of times, us personally. His stats are great, but I don't know if the stats themselves are enough to tell a full story, especially when you, especially sort of like when you consider the matches that he's been playing in prior to this sort of like addition in the team itself. They haven't exactly been like the top end sort of teams in general, so like the numbers are a little bit skewed in that sort of sense. It's a weird one in that sort of respect. So I'm looking forward to it with a bit of skepticism, just because it'd be nice to see what he can do, but I haven't really seen enough to make a definitive assessment on how he's going to be.
Yeah.
The next one along, Crimbo getting promoted on trial to the main team, and then obviously Keto going down to Big Academy. I've got a little bit more experience with Crimbo. I saw him quite a lot. We cast him a fair bit when he was playing on alternate attacks, and then obviously previously on Koana with Skrunk and Crystal and those sort of guys. So this is a rifler, very young, very sharp, incredibly consistent when I've seen him play, and it feels really nice to see him getting the call up, because I kind of looked at him and knew that there was something, but I just didn't know where the spot was going to be. And because he's been able to find himself on Big Academy and now getting the call up, it feels like, okay, that's the route in how he's actually been able to get called up to the higher divisions.
I think it's actually really interesting now, right? Where even at the beginning, before we play Academy League, we were kind of doubting, like, what is the point of an Academy team? We hadn't really seen many moves up from Academy teams to the big teams, right? I think the only example we've had is obviously Gambit. Gambit youngsters becoming Gambit, tearing everyone down, basically. That's the biggest thing that we have. But now it's nice to see a lot of these teams, right, building up the players, building up the experience, moving them up. And I think Malzahn XT is a great example of that, and actually Big themselves making this move as well. Obviously bringing in some local talent from Big Academy and whatnot. And as you said, with this big move in general, I'm actually very excited to see the bigger picture now on that level of Academy teams, right? And yeah, I think this is a perfect opportunity for everyone involved, right? For all parties, for Big themselves, this whole move. I think it's very, very exciting to see. Not only them, but the Academy as well, right? I think that's something I did want to touch on a little bit, is the Academy team's performance. Not exactly the worst in the world. I remember we were questioning if they were even going to be a side to talk about, right? But now that they've got keto involved, I'm actually quite excited to see how this team does.
Yeah, we got to see keto play for a Big Academy the other day, and I mean, look, he was great because obviously he's a tier 1 talent coming down into an Academy team. But you got to also look at the stats prior to that and what he was doing for the team. And Big did not look all that great. The main team of Big didn't look all that great with him in the competitions they were playing. Like, I think to that 4 Glory loss, and it's like, oh, that's a bit harsh. And then I also think back to Forza, and it's like, oh, well, they're not quite the Forza that we used to know, so that's also quite a bit harsh. And the close result against Fnatic with all the stand-ins, which they also lost to. So it's like, Big were on a very low streak coming into this one. I'm not certain whether or not keto was the kind of was the problem per se, but I also sort of see where they had to sort of make a move somewhere somehow. I do notice that it's not a 1-for-1 sort of move, because I don't think keto was a lurker like Crimbo is. So I'm not sure how that dynamic is going to affect things for Big and the main squad. But for the Academy team, it's been doing wonders for them, obviously. A real good result for them, seeing how well he slotted into that roster to be able to at least make them decent. And as well as that, he was the top performer during the Enterprise matchup during ESEA. So he's definitely proving himself to be a powerhouse in the sense that he knows what to do against the lesser experienced squads. And I think that, again, it's sort of that case of just that extra experience coming down to coach some newer talents, some unknown players, and some guys that don't have quite the amount of experience that keto does have.
Yeah. I think if we draw on again back to Blue Jays, the North Macedonian team, I remember seeing them in portions last year where they're about 200th in the world. I think they were known as Good Game, and then they went to, I don't know, one of the mixed names where they were unorged. But they have gone so far up the rankings that what surprised me massively is Styles parting way with the roster. Like, you get to a top 40-ish kind of position. I mean, for the last little while, they sort of float in and above the top 40. And for him to part ways after they've done so well recently was a surprise. It does give room for Necrogenesis. I mean, someone that Jay and I, we have seen for so many years in the Serbian scene, an actual opportunity of not playing on one of these Onyxes or one of the Serbian teams that were like 120th in the world, and they're actually a competitive team, to see what he can do. But yeah, that was a surprise to me for sure.
Yeah, especially because when you consider as well, like, the whole North Macedonia sort of region isn't exactly like it's a powerhouse in the Counter-Strike space, not even in the tier 2 space for that matter. So it is kind of a nice surprise. You mentioned Necrogenesis and obviously what he's been a part of in terms of his career and the teams that he's played for and the other rosters that he's been a part of. And he's always been proving himself to be one of those guys that you always watch out for whenever a team like a Level Up or an Onyx or an EC Brugge would always, we'd always look at Necrogenesis as being one of those guys. So it is nice to see him finally find some decent success. I think they hit top 30 about a month ago. So they've already found themselves in that. They've already found themselves a decent spot to work from. I'm just worried, however, that this is a team that is going to hit that peak and then dip off in the same sort of way that a lot of tier 2 teams end up doing so. Because, again, like I said before, there's not that background of excellence from that region and from these players just yet. Maybe Necrogenesis is the one example that you can think of, but I look at those other guys and I can't remember anything notable from Dan1, from Kakanito, from Addict, or anybody else like that. I don't remember any really good rosters from those guys, and therefore it's one of those unpredictable ones where, yes, it could hold itself together. Yes, they could keep floating between the top 40 and top 30, but I'm not 100% certain just yet. I need to see more.
I feel like it's kind of in the shadow of Enterprise a little bit, right? Like this roster sort of in the same channel where, again, we don't see much talent come from the region that they're involved with, but
Bad News Eagles as well, maybe?
Yeah, I was actually looking at them as another team that maybe we see a lot of in terms of face value. The players are pretty good. You know, even with the changes coming in, we were like, wow, okay, this is going to be a decent side. We have the moment of excellence, right? I think it was Enterprise season 38, 39, sort of around that, where it was Forza that was meant to be playing in what it was Premier, so it's 39. So they were meant to be in the Premier slot, but because Forza had already qualified through to Pro League, that it was Enterprise's call-up. And I think they only just lost in their group, right? Only just went to demotion. So it was a bit of a painful one for them. And as you said, I feel like this team is following in the same sort of footsteps. Jay was right. They hit number 30 a month ago in terms of that. And they have sort of plateaued a bit. Is this the change that we're going to talk about and be like, this is the big upgrade? Is this going to be the push? Or is this where they flat out again? I think there's that fine line. And I am excited to see how that one goes. I think, you know, we've seen a lot of patterns recently with these sides that don't go international, right? I think Sprout is a really good example of that as well, where it was that full German 5 lineup. We were like, okay, promise, like a couple of decent results, maybe not the best results in the world, but it's definitely helping them. And then they drop off, and then they fall, and then it's like, well, the last 6 months of our time has been ruined. We're going to have to make a roster change. So it does feel like there is that fine line. And obviously, for any team that we watch, I don't hope that they cross that line and obviously put themselves in a position where it doesn't work out. But it does feel like that, right? And Necrogenesis could be the saving grace, but at the same time, they could fall very, very far here.
Yeah, that's the problem that you mentioned with the Enterprise thing, is the fact that, look, they had a great run at the end of 2021. It was the season 38 is when they competed actually in ESEA. And then they had that big run at V4, and we were like, oh my God, the rise of a new tier 2 team. And then what have they done since that point? Sweet FA is the answer to that question, because they haven't really been all that great overall. So again, that's where my issues come when I take a look at a new team rising through the rankings. That, yeah, they look great now. Where are they going to be in 6 months from now? Where are they going to be in 3 months from now? Because that could be the difference between their top 30 peak and then not even being a team anymore. So we have to see more from them. They've got to keep this up. They've got to keep it going. And they've got to prove that there is more to this squad than just a flash in the pan.
Right. I think pretty good time to move on, right? I want to move on to the ESL Challenger League and ESEA playoff stage. I think, do you want to start at the more advanced level than it is the ECL? I think ECL itself isn't exactly the hottest topic right now. Advanced, however, I put Upsets Galore as the title because I think obviously we were all chilling while Jay was making his pizza and we were just watching. Actually, when you look at the bracket for this season, there is a lot of things that could cause a lot of trouble and a lot of teams that could get eliminated at a stage where should we really be talking about elimination and things like that, right? Where, okay, they don't get dropped out completely, but it's actually quite scary to see that these sides are sort of where they are. So if you want to kick things off, gents, any thoughts about Advanced so far?
I just want to insert very quickly, obviously, the match you're referencing was the K23 Fanbit match, and obviously they nearly took that on the Fanbit side. And I just want to say to K23, how the fuck did you let that nearly go? Like, that's got to be one of the silliest things I've ever seen in any... And I don't understand, it's advanced, it's wild, it's super random how things can play out. But let me put this into perspective for you. This is K23, a team we just gave a lot of praise to for having a resurgence in their careers. They almost lost to Fanbit. Let me say that again. They almost lost to Fanbit.
Yeah.
In a best of 3 in 2-0 after Fanbit 16-7 them on that fucking one. Like, how do you let that go? Like, I again, no disrespect to the guys on Fanbit, but you consider the experience and international tenure of K23, and you should be like taking a look at them in this bracket. I think they should run through damn near everybody, I want to say, minus a couple of exceptions here and there, and they should be like contenders for ECL. So how they nearly lost that, I think, is still indicative of the fact that K23, yes, then they have had a resurgence and they have had some good stuff in terms of, you know, the tournaments that they've done. We always mention the Thunderpick result, and the getting to the grand finals is great, but then you take a look at other results, including this one, and you think to yourself, there's still an angle in which K23 could bottle this whole playoff for me.
I'm not that distraught on K23. Like, okay, they lost Noog. It's not their map pick, and it's one of best fan bits in the pool. For the second map, okay, it was very close, but look at the way they tightened up their game. Look at the way that they played out there on Overpass. They never ran into any stacks. They played incredibly slow. They baited a lot of mistakes, and they proved themselves to be the stronger team by far in this sort of affair. I think if you look back to the last few seasons of Advance, what do we know every single time in this playoff bracket? Upsets galore every single time when it comes to Advance. So it does happen. I think the things that scared me most or surprised me, I'd say, is Onyx beating Anonymous in the first round, and then Onyx beating Singularity. This is the Hungarian team where, okay, in the past, we obviously know of the BP5 guys. We've known of the Salamander guys, but there is not a lot of known names on this Hungarian side from maybe the ones in the past, and they've done very well in this event so far. We saw Masonic 2-0ing Forza. Like, what is going on there? So as a whole, I think we will find some surprises of big teams being knocked out very early into this bracket.
Yeah, I mean, I take a look at that lower bracket, and I think that there are some spicy potential big squads that could end up falling. You mentioned the For Glory side and how well they did, and how much they were able to hold their own. Like, I feel like that when we talk about the teams that have been starting to run their rise through, like a Blue Jays, for example, and all these and other teams that are coming through the ranks. For Glory have gone a bit remiss, honestly. Like, they're not exactly a team that you look at in high regards, but they've been having some deep runs lately, and I'm curious to see whether or not this lower bracket run from them could make the name of the team that we hope it would do. I kind of wanted to query real quickly whether or not we think that this team is going to be within the relegation sort of phase, because it does feel to me like they're on that rise to that particular position. I just don't know if they're ready for it yet.
I think the fact that they're already in the lower bracket, I would say no.
I agree.
For this season, I think if they want to reach relegation, if I'm not mistaken, it's 4th place, right? So you have to come top 4 in this, which means they're going to have to win 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 BO3s in a row. 6 BO3s.
5 or 6, yeah.
Well, they're going to have to win the lower final, so it will be 6 BO3s in a row to make the relegation stage. I don't think this season, but if they keep the form that they have been, I completely agree. I think that actually this side is looking pretty good. It's sad to see. I think we had a little chat about this on your stream, Dweg, a few days ago, right? In that there's a lot of sides that do well inside of the Tier 2 circuit, but when it reaches getting to, well, what is Pro League effectively, right, through this ESEA stage, we look at a lot of sides and very droughted results, incredibly droughted results when it comes to this. And I think For Glory, as you said, inside of this Tier 2 circuit, a really sick run. But as you can see, if I scroll back up here, right, a 2-1 for Dynamo Eclot over them. With the caliber of teams that they've been playing against and the caliber of teams that they should be beating, should they be losing out against Dynamo Eclot? Probably not. I think something to mention here, Sangal 2-0 over iNation. Sangal, a team that's made the RMR, is now making a fairly decent run so far within ESEA Advanced. As you said, Onyx as well involved. K23 obviously retaining the upper bracket. I did want to put a bit more emphasis on the Masonic Forza game, though. First map went to overtime, went Masonic's way. You're playing against number 20 in the world, and you lose 16-11 on Ancient, and you start on the CT side. It has been a bit of a dire strait for Forza this event. And again, it's a side that we saw in Premier 2 seasons ago, and it's a team that we won't even see make relegation. It seems to be, at least, within this season.
Yeah, crazy. I mean, even Anonymous, we normally see the Poles do very well in Premier, and actually we've seen it in the past that like, AGO have made Pro League because of the promotion. So, yeah, there are some upsets. I always think that if you get down into that lower bracket round 1, God bless you making top 4, because that is bloody tough. You do not want to be in that sort of position. If you go down in the lower bracket a few games on, then it's okay. But as a whole, the bracket's massive for ESEA Advanced. For any of the streamers out there, it's open IP. So if you see one of those games on HLTV, get on it. I know when I was talking to some of the Fanbit guys after their game against K23, they were very happy, even though it was a bit of a troll cast, that it was actually in English, because the majority of their games so far the entire season haven't been in English at all. So with this opportunity for any of the upcoming streamers out there or wanting to kind of prove off your casting, open IP, HLTV games, good viewership, get on it.
Well, lads, they are competing against Entropic Prague in 4 hours' time in that lower bracket match, and there is no English stream, so...
So, Jay, what are you saying?
I'm just saying.
He's just saying, but he's not doing anything.
Do you want me to do something? I can list my stream and we can do it. We can do it again.
I'm unavailable, but
I might be
I will be looking at the game. Yeah, it would be nice if one of the UK lads are going to put the Fanbit and Entropic Praga because they need the support.
All right. Definitely. Well, if any other UK streamer wants to list their channel on HLTV, I'll be glad to back out. But after this show, I will disable my VPN and put it on.
We like it. That's it.
And list the channel. So ReTr00 will be on the TeamSpeak later tonight. So if you want to come join me, feel free to.
I'll have a little look. Depends, because I'm out shopping. I'm out shopping, soon. So got to reel the shopping back in, and then maybe if there's time after eating, I'll let you know. But yeah, super excited. I think maybe a little touch on ECL before we move to our final topic of today. Obviously, for those maybe that don't know, ESL Challenger League, previously known as ESEA Premier or MDL. Depends how far back you want to go. Just the rebrand, of course, now being the ESL Challenger League. Basically, a step to conference is where we're at now. So far, gents, been a pretty interesting one. The 8 teams that have made it. Entropic, 1 win. Akimbo, Heat, Whistler Krakow, Ecstatic, Finest, Saw. Those are the teams. What I did want to start by saying, it is now, if you scroll to the top, if you want to scroll to the top, in fact, the way that the placement works is now you don't get dropped to advanced, it is now you get put to relegation, which means the teams that came bottom in the group aren't going to be set back to advanced next season. There is still a chance that makes it again, and so obviously for us, we're quite thankful UKCS gets their opportunity back at the ESL Challenger League. But I wanted to scroll down and talk about the groups just a little bit here, gents. Wow, first and foremost, Group D, I think, as you said, Dweg, the D for death, it always seems to be that way now, right? Is that quite a killer group, Finest, Saw, Skade, Sinners. Probably the one of the more stacked groups. In fact, maybe you're looking at Group B to be your killer, where Akimbo have topped the groups. Obviously, Blink 02, not the Blink that we know as Bad News Eagles. Yeah. It was a different Blink. Copenhagen Flames going 1 and 2 in that group as well. Big talking point there. Group A, CIS overruling, of course, as it always is in ESEA. Whistler Krakow, Ecstatic. Playoff stage, actually quite exciting here, gents.
The way I want to start is, first of all, I really felt for ITB. I mean, you're grinding ESEA Advanced Playoffs, and who do you get in your group but bloody Entropic 1 win and Nemega? And this is even thinking of early or late January, early February. This is prior to Thomas and Smuya kind of coming over. So this is a tough draw in Group A. I think Group B, that Akimbo side is now the new Falcons, which you can see there in the playoff bracket. The ex-LDLC guys are doing quite well overall. Heat as well, 2 French teams making it in the top 2. Copenhagen Flames to not make playoffs is a massive surprise, I think, overall in this group stage. Group C, we've seen some very good things recently from Whistler Krakow. They seem to be getting back up to the heights of the higher end of Tier 2. Ecstatic, we've seen them for quite a while, the ex-Lingby guys. Gamer Legion, they've always been a decent contender in this sort of level. Normally middle of the pack, at least with the previous iterations of the top flight, but yeah, them not even being able to get a win. And then Group D, I can understand Sinners because obviously, like I said earlier, they have been rough recently, but Skade not making it out of groups when we think about the caliber of this team, that was a huge surprise to me. Somehow Finest, even with their rotating door of lineup, made it through, and Saw as well. We haven't seen a lot positive from Saw in quite a while.
Yeah, well, credit to Finest on that front because obviously they've kept a roster for the most part for the last best part of the year. Like, obviously they just switched out Mar and Twist, so that's a slight exception to the rule. But it's a far cry. It's a far cry compared to the just dismantling and rebuilding and dismantling like it's fucking Lego from Finest, because that's basically what they were doing for the entire 2021. So it's a much more stable roster than what we've seen previously, so I can forgive that a little bit. The big shocker for me was Saw making it through that group, because what have they actually done in the recent few months? Like, they're not a team that we consider to be like top end of the tier 2 scene anymore. They hold their own probably about mid position in my sort sort of like eyes. They did well at the RMR qualifiers to make it through there, and then they had this run at this particular event. So I'm kind of stunned that things have worked out the way they have done, especially considering Skade, who have just taken a championship, who have always been consistently good, who were always among that Bulgarian sort of like set of teams that would always do really, really well in the international space. And then this happens. So yeah, it is quite rough for them, and it's to two teams that, while yeah, they are good, you wouldn't have expected them to go over Skade. I would have said that of all the teams in this group, the one that should have made it in at the first place position probably should have been Skade.
Yeah. And I'll even back you up further there on Saw. I think, Jay, when we were doing the 2020 Tier 2 awards, we were praising Saw so highly because they were unreal in 2020. They were just skyrocketing up the placements. They were doing really well. And then it came into 2021 and things really weren't as great. They made a couple of roster changes. They went back to the original 5-man lineup. And I think for a while, they have been stagnant. They haven't been on the rise and towards that higher end. So good on them for making the playoffs, and hopefully they can show up. I mean, knowing that you've got Ecstatic in the first round, I should say Entropic in the first round. That is a tough draw, because you would imagine out of all the teams here, Entropic are probably the favorite to come first. Would we all agree?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, at the same time, you look at that whole group, or that whole draw, and you also see who else would you put there when it comes to like seeding. Like, would you put anyone else above, or would you put Saw above anybody else? So, arguably, you can sort of make sense in terms of the way that the playoffs have been drawn out. Obviously, coming in second place for the seeding. From the group itself. I personally think that's an appropriate sort of way that the bracket's been drawn. It sucks for Saw, obviously, but it also is just kind of stunning that they made it this far in the first place, in my opinion.
Lads, I'm going to pop one more question before we move to ESL Prem. One-word answers, please. Who is winning ESL Challenger League Season 40?
Entropic.
Yeah, I'm going to join now. Entropic.
You know what, lads? Outsider, Ecstatic. Ecstatic are gonna win the event.
Yeah,
I think they're second in line. So
I feel like that upper bracket semi-final between those two teams is going to be interesting.
Killer game.
Because it's going to be a hell of a matchup, and whoever gets that one in terms of the casters, congrats. I'm jealous of you. But like in terms of that sort of head-to-head, I don't know if that'll be decisive per se. I don't know if that's going to be the one that sort of decides who's going to win the whole thing, because there could be a lower bracket run from either squad in that sort of sense. But those are the only two real outliers. Ecstatic for me are the underdogs in that whole contention, though, because Entropic have just been so good. My one issue with Entropic, though, is that in terms of where they go in the tier 1 space, they usually have those runs where it's like they get to tier 1 and then they don't do anything at the tier 1 level. So for them, it's more of just capitalizing on this opportunity to play in the tier 2 level, and I'm hoping it's not a downward trend when we take a look at what they've done in their tier 1 tournaments. And I think that they should be favorites still for the moment. It's just a bit of a worrying sort of thing to keep an eye out for in the future.
Gents, one more thing to talk about. ESL Prem. UKCS is going to be happy that they've been mentioned so damn much today. Let's talk about it, right? We're coming to the closing stages of the groups. I think you lads are on the last day, right? Or the last few games of ESL Prem this season. Coming to a close in the groups. Let's talk about the bracket first and foremost. Group A compared to Group B. Probably, as I said in the title, it's at its best. It's at its most competitive. Group A, obviously, endpoint at the top. TLR surprising us. I think Group A has gone as expected, right, in terms of seeding and as sort of our own predictions would go. Group B, Blackhand 4-0, Eco 2-2, Royals currently 1-3 as well. I mean, to be fair, there was a forfeit win in the mix. But, yeah, I am very shocked to see how Group B, as close as it is.
I have to say, I'm looking forward to the last day, because Blackhand versus Into the Breach is going to be the second match of the last day, and that's going to be like match of the season with the way that these groups have gone down. I'm kind of shocked, actually, that ITB haven't dominated their way through this one. I mean, I guess at the same time, they haven't faced Blackhand just yet, but by all accounts, they should be up with the endpoint side in terms of the 4-0 and being the only team in Group B for the 4-0, especially with the roster moves that they've made. Like, this is a team that's so unbelievably powerful, and in terms of the best of threes that we could be seeing in the playoffs. I imagine the Endpoint ITB is going to end up being the grand finals by all accounts, and as a result, I'm looking forward to that that matchup and how that will play out, because it probably is the closest we've ever seen a UK team come to dethroning Endpoint in this competition, and I'm personally really excited to see how far ITB can go.
Well, we already saw it, didn't we? We saw it in that last day of Pinnacle Cup III of Endpoint playing into the breach, and that was only a 2-0. So that's something to kind of keep in mind, is even though the gap is so closing, I think back to a few seasons ago of Endpoint versus Jets in the best of 5 grand final, and that was probably the closest we've had. And if I was to compare the teams, it wasn't the closest, but it was the closest result. So that's what kind of sparks questions of, is Endpoint actually going to be challenged? Because when I definitely look at Group B, and when I look at this group, or 2 groups as a whole, no one is a threat to ITB other than Endpoint, in my opinion. Like, they can be anyone here. Best of ones are slightly different because you're not always playing your best map in the pool. Like, you can really show yourself on best of 3s when you get to the playoffs. Fanbit I don't think we've actually seen Fanbit play properly so far. Like, I know that they'll joke about and say, oh, we're just having fun and we're still getting wins, but we haven't actually seen Fanbit play proper CS yet. We'll probably see that in the later stages of the playoffs. For me, Lucent was probably going to have the marker over the last resort before the roster changes came in. And then obviously we saw them get 3rd place at Epic. The team kind of died overnight, or at least keeping the core 3, but just having a couple of extra pieces. So I think that's really hindered them, because if they would have kept that lineup, they probably do keep a top 3 position. That's not looking likely anymore in the Group A position as a whole. But yeah, this Blackhand side, we saw them on LAN, Ryan, but I don't think we really thought that they would be as dominant as they are in Prem.
No, I think actually it surprised me more than anything looking at the Blackhand guys. Maybe obviously for those not too clued up about the UK scene. They were Dripmen before, maybe True Ambition if you want to go back when. They were a side that I think we kind of had as like a middling team in main, right? Where we were kind of like, okay, maybe we see a playoffs run, won't go very deep. Like, we're entertained by their performance, but it's not your ITBs, and it's not your endpoints, and it's probably not your fanbits, right? And we sort of had them, me personally at least, if you want to include endpoint in the mix at the time that they were, outside of this season, just beforehand, where endpoint was a UK team, I would say they were 4th best team, maybe in hot competition now with the TLR guys, but how they performed in-house this season, crazy. Absolutely unreal to see the performances they've put on, and nothing but appreciation for those guys, because as we know, the roster changes usually hinder a team. These guys have absolutely taken it on board, and they're running with it, and they're having a really good run inside Prem. I think same can be said for the TLR guys. Maybe not as definitive, obviously, because you have Endpoint and Fanbit in your group, but we were quite confident that they were going to make top 3. They have done exactly that. The 16-2 over Endpoint, that was on the last game of the day of day 1. Quite unfortunate to see, but having said that, a 16-14 over Heaven and Hell, that was good fun to see. A 16-13 over Never Broke Again, and a 16-12 over Lucent. Yeah, okay, the scorelines are quite close, but they're comfortable wins. Now they've got 3 in the bag. They have guaranteed themselves, or they haven't guaranteed themselves, but as long as they win their next game or Lucent lose their next game, they are guaranteed top 3, which is nice to see, right? I think a team again, TLR, very respectable. But as you said, Blackhand, TLR, 2 very big surprises this season for me.
I'm also surprised Heaven and Hell have not done very well. I've seen them in other competitions doing fantastically. They just qualified for that ASEX Vienna Open event, and yet they're 1-3 in Prem. I think, yeah, very big surprise to actually see them not put up the replicable performances that we expect from those kind of guys. And then for Royals, I mean, I said it to Swaggy when we were at Epic, hold the lineup. Hold the lineup, hold the lineup. And he was like, yeah, no worries, it's going to happen. What have we seen only yesterday, last night? Ents is leaving the team. Okay, that's fair enough. Like, it's not a kick, it's someone leaving. But again, we just go through this cycle again with Royals, is that we never get the same lineup every single week. And I think that is the detriment to why they continue to struggle here as an overall picture, is that if you're not one of those stable teams that work really hard with the pieces that you've got and you're always interchanging, then you're not going to get the victories. And even though, yeah, you can quote the forfeit loss, like that's acceptable in the situation that occurred with the scheduling, but again, yeah, disappointing. I know obviously for Enzi he's trying to take a break and maybe he comes back. But for Royals as a whole, that's not the ideal picture of having yet another roster change.
Yeah, I don't think there's much you could have done in that particular circumstance. I'll give him a little bit of forgiveness, but just as a general sort of like tone to the UK scene, as someone who's been here for 7 years, for God's sake, keep together. Just stay with, only make roster moves if it makes sense to make a roster move. If there is an internal problem that's insurmountable, if there is just a clashing play style, you know, that might hinder the performance of the team, that's when you make the roster moves overall. And you can see that with ITB and how well they've stuck together and how they've only just made a couple of moves that are definitive upgrades in terms of firepower, and now they're doing great things internationally. Then now you can see that's how you make a change in the UK scene. I've seen so many amazing squads that have gone to events, won events, and still made roster moves because of whatever stupid petty reason, and the end result becomes, well, you know, that's a more recent example. But I'm thinking back to like the old days of like Vexed, for example. Like I remember it might have been a Vexed or a London Esports roster from a number of years ago that won an ice series. And then they disbanded the roster. Like, why? You've got a winning formula there. Stick with it and play with it and do something with it. And this is just a message to everybody else in the scene. Yes, in the Royals case, it's a bit more forgivable because it was out of their control. But in most of the cases right here, it just sucks to see any sort of roster change because I know where it leads to, and it could lead to disaster. I think for this team because it could go straight out the fucking window.
Yeah, I think actually, apart from the Royals case, we said nothing but upgrades to teams this season. I think, okay, we lost Lucent. Exactly the point I was going to bring up, right? Okay, we lost Lucent. It's unfortunate to see Nem and Timo parting ways after 3 years of bromance. But, of course, having said that, we've got the eco upgrade in Christ now, which I'm super excited to see. Obviously, it's sad to see Dutchy move away. He's still hungry to play, and hopefully he gets that opportunity, kind of like Tadpole in the sense that we were talking about from earlier, right? But we've got Christ coming in, which, again, I'm super excited to see. Always love seeing Rory on the server. At the same time, I think we talk about the upgrades maybe made to the ITB roster. That's the more obvious one. There's a lot of upgrades, right? There's a lot of upgrades in the UK scene, and I think we're starting to see, overall, the big benefit of UKCS, right? I think we're always clowned for the UK scene. We're like, haha, you know, funny, nice one, British teeth, whatnot. I think we're making a stand for ourselves now in a local level, which I'm super excited and super happy to see. Fanbit, Endpoint, I guess not so much a UK team, but I guess we can include some of the talent on that team, Max and Surreal, into the breach. Eco making international appearances. Blackhand, if they continue to perform the way they are in ESL Prem, I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see sort of the shadow of Fanbit being followed here, right? Where we get maybe one invite to a Relog Media event. Maybe we don't put up the best of performances, but do you know what? We may get a map off of a fairly decent Tier 2 side, Tier 3, and then that's where we see the snowball that we see into the breach taking. It's nice to see that we're getting these benefits to the scene, and I think overall, I'm excited for the future, lads. I'm very excited to see the future of UKCS. For something that has been Endpoint dominated for so long, actually the playing field is starting to be balanced out a bit. And even though Endpoint are a UK team, if we want to include them within the topic of ESL Prem, ITB aren't far behind. Fanbit, not that far behind ITB in that sense either. Obviously, your Blackhand and your Eco, another two very rigid sides. TLR, I think it's a bit early in the cycle to make the judgments just yet in regards to how they're going to look. I think this is their first season together in Maine or something like that. So, again, very early stages, but very happy to see that it's blossomed the way it has.
Yeah, I'd say that especially if things keep going in the trajectory that they are, I can see ITB overtaking Endpoint on the global scale in about 6 months, assuming things keep going the way that they go. Possibly sooner, depending on how things play out. Now, I think that ITB have made some very stellar roster moves. They've got some former Tier 1 players in their own right. Endpoint have been kind of on the downward trajectory ever since their Pro League appearance, and especially in the Premiership. The reason why I look forward to ITB and seeing where they and seeing what they've done internationally and locally as well. I consider that with Endpoint being a weakened roster and not having the same team from the last season where ITB played in the grand finals, I give them an outside chance to winning that series. I give them an outside chance to taking down the Endpoint side. Endpoint's still the most established team, and they've got the most trophies in the world at this point. But it's one of those things where I see, if things keep going the way that they are, ITB are one of my teams to watch out for the next 6 months.
Yeah.
And during the Premiership playoffs.
Yeah, agreed. I think Cody put me on the spot in the first day, and he's like, "Who's winning it?" I was like, "I don't know, ITB." But I actually kind of stick with it.
If ITB pull it off, you're gonna clip that, put it on Twitter, and just say, "I'm not a fortune teller, but I fucking called it."
No, agreed. I think actually the way this season's shaping up to be, obviously they can't play with Thomas this season because he's already a registered Endpoint player. So maybe it doesn't happen in this season, but definitely the next, like with Thomas being moved across, if he does stay, and if Smuya obviously does stay for this season as well, for the next season as well, depending on how that 1 month trial contract goes, if he wants to extend that or whether he doesn't, I'm super excited to see that into the Breach side. Something I did want to touch on a little bit, I guess not inside the ESL Premiership, but announced a little bit ago, was the new roster made up of, I do believe it was Timo, Beve, and a few other people. Our thoughts on that? Maybe you guys haven't seen it. I'll try and.
I haven't even seen that.
Let me dig up the tweet. Let me dig up the tweet first and foremost to see
if you share the tweet to us, and I will try and use my hoity-toity attitude with my insider knowledge of the UK scene going back the last better part of a decade, and I'll try and tell you whether or not this team is going to be any good. It probably might be. I mean, you've already given some very stellar names to start things off.
Yeah, here we go.
I think the concern for all the UK teams is going to be competing at that top end level against ITB and Endpoint. But read out the roster for me, ReTr00. What have we got?
So we have Whiffin, Crit, Timo, ESO, Beve. I think firepower-wise, this is actually quite an exciting time. I was very excited to see this team. Probably an ESL Prem contender. This is definitely a main team. When we look maybe to Crit having the experience in Fanbit, or what it was at the time of Coalesce, obviously when that team first started. We have Timo as well with that experience, but I do believe he's taking the IGL helm now. Beve, we always know as a rifler that can absolutely pull rounds out of nothing. I think his time at Zenex definitely proved that he is a fairly decent rifler when it comes to that. Talk about Whiffin as well, probably the least known in terms of this team with ESO, but two very capable players as well. I do believe Whiffin came from Havoc, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So Inter's experience, another side that I am pretty happy to see go forward. Obviously, not exactly an ESL Prem this season. Beve playing in the Sigma LAN with Thomas as well. That's going to be decent experience. This team in general, I mean, it's hard to tell, right? But another team that's going to be joining us in the next season that is of that main level. So another side that we can talk about in terms of the UKCS.
So in terms of this like roster and this new sort of team, you got to like look at it in the context of the 5 kittens, right? Because Beve, Crit, and Whiffin were obviously playing in that roster, and they are as part of that team for the Premiership. That is the same Whiffin, right? Like WFN.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, cool. Just double checking, making sure I was getting that right. But the basic replacements are Mixan and Magic, and the question is, do you rate Crit and Co as being better than those parts? And I would say probably yes. But only slightly, like a very slight amount. And as a result, like I think that it probably could be on the same level as the old 5 kittens roster, and therefore I'm not sure how much damage they can do in terms of the UK space. I mean, they probably make it back at the Premiership. I'll give them that much. They probably will be able to rock the promotion tournament. I think they're playing in promotion, right? Because they came second from last in their group, correct?
Yes, so they are going to have to play through promotion next season.
Yeah, okay. So that's locked in. I think that they'll probably make it through promotions. In terms of competing at the higher end of the scene, I'm not 100% sold on it just yet.
No, there's no chance. I mean, there's no way you can look at this lineup and say they're going to compete with a Fanbit, an Eco, or an ITB off the bat. I would like to come back to this lineup in maybe 3 months, 6 months, because there are some very good pieces in there. We've seen what Whiffen can do, land experience, talented AWPer. We know the experience that Timo was able to get with some of the Coalesce guys. And then obviously you've got some other pieces in there that are well known around the scene. So as a whole, the lineup to me and for UK fans in general, probably quite exciting. But if we're talking about the higher end of the scene, this is not a team that we're looking at. This is a team that might be able to get those sort of next jumps up, and
TLRs,
maybe eventually they're a TLR or they're the Dripman along that sort of level. So yeah, best of luck to them creating their new lineup, because that was announced quite a little while ago. So we'll see what they can actually do.
Yeah. It's going to be difficult. Gents, closing thoughts, ESL Prem. I'm not going to ask for the winners. I'm going to ask for your top 3.
Well, Endpoint ITB are going to be in there by default. Now, the question is Fambit or Blackhand? That's the next big concern. Can we make it top 4? Can I just do that and just
no,
throw that together?
That's why I said top 3.
To be fair, semi-finals and there's no third place decider, so it kind of, you know, is top 4.
All right. Well, okay. Give me how you think. Who's going to be more competitive if there was that third, fourth decider? Who's making the third place, Jay? Stop trying to weave your way out of the question. Answer the damn thing.
Or I think I got to lean towards Fambit on the basis of just the experience alone and the name value of that team alone. Yeah, Blackhand have been stellar so far in this in this tournament, but I just think that if I had to put them up head to head, and maybe we might see that during the playoffs, I don't know. But I have to sort of rate Fambit just because they have a lot more experience, they have a lot more tenure, they are very, very reputable players, well known around the scene, well experienced around the scene, well rehearsed around the scene. There's a lot of positives going the way of Fambit versus Blackhand, who have had that one run. So outside chance for them, but I'm going Fambit on that one.
Yeah, I'd probably go Endpoint 1, ITB 2, and then Fambit 3. And then for the rest, I mean, even for Blackhand, while they've done very well in the best of ones, do I compare them to the likes of a Fambit or an Eco in that sort of environment? Yeah. Probably not. But I will say, we've seen in previous seasons, sometimes all you need is a good run. Sometimes all you need is that one good group stage. You're playing with a lot of confidence and magic can happen, but they're not going to be a favorite as such. Whether they can surprise everyone and do some damage, best of luck to them. But as of whole, yeah, Endpoint 1, ITB 2, and Fambit 3.
You know what? I'm going to throw a bit of an outsider. I'm gonna try and rustle some feathers a bit. I am gonna go for. I'm gonna go ITB 1, Endpoint 2, Eco 3. I reckon the Christ edition. It could beat Fambit. It could beat Fambit. It just depends how the bracket works out. But anyway, that's us done. Thank you very much, gents, for joining us. Obviously, your socials has been plugged throughout, but obviously go and follow you guys individually. And make sure to follow us at Tier 2 Talk on Twitter, because a lot more is going to be coming out. Clips of this, you know. We're going all out here. We're going all out here. So, yeah, thank you guys very much for joining us. Join us soon-ish. We don't have a confirmed date of the next, but we'll let you know on the Twitters whenever it goes off. And, hey, we could be having a couple of special guests on very, very soon. But thank you very much, guys. Have a good day. And, yeah, we'll see you guys soon. Bye-bye.